Give your eyes a rest, and let your mind wander. No screens, just sound and imagination. Let the story begin. Rain lashed against the stained glass windows of the Revellon Palace, each drop sounding like a warning. Princess Alana tightened the straps of her travel pack, her hands trembling not from fear, but from fury. Tonight, she would escape the gilded cage, escape the forced marriage to the power-hungry Duke Malachi, escape a future that felt like a slow death. A sudden crash echoed from the hallway, followed by the sharp clang of steel. Alana's heart hammered against her ribs. "They've found me!" She reached for the dagger hidden in her boot, but the chamber door flew open before she could draw it. Silhouetted against the torchlight stood soldiers clad in the unmistakable armor of Eldoria, the most powerful kingdom on the continent. Their leader, a man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. His voice was a low, unyielding command. "By order of King Caius, you are to come with us." "On what grounds?" Alana demanded, squaring her shoulders. "The king does not explain his orders. He only expects them to be obeyed." She fought, of course. She was a skilled warrior, trained in secret by her late father's most trusted guard. But they were too many. As they dragged her through the rain-slicked courtyard, she saw him, Duke Malachi, standing in the shadows of the archway, a triumphant smirk twisting his features. In that moment, she understood. This was not a random act of aggression. It was a calculated move in a game she had only just begun to comprehend. As the Eldorian soldiers threw her onto a horse and bound her hands, a single question burned in her mind. "Why does the Storm King of Eldoria want me?" The journey to Eldoria was a blur of cold nights and guarded silence. They arrived at the capital as the sun rose, its rays illuminating a fortress of gleaming black stone and towering spires, a palace built from ice and iron, much like its ruler's reputation. She was brought directly to the throne room. It was vast and intimidating, with walls carved from dark obsidian and banners bearing the golden eagle of Eldoria hanging from the high ceiling. And there, seated on a throne that looked as if it had been hewn from a glacier, was King Caius. He was younger than she had expected, with sharp, aristocratic features and storm-gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a god carved from winter itself. "Welcome, Princess Alana," he said, his voice deep and resonant, filling the silent hall. Or should I say, the runaway bride. She wrenched her arms free from the guard's grip. "You have no right to hold me here. I am a princess of Revellon." "You are a pawn in a game much larger than your small kingdom," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "And for now, you are my guest." "Guest?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Is that what you call a prisoner?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "You may call it what you wish. You will remain here until I decide your fate." He rose from his throne, descending the steps until he stood mere inches from her. He was tall, forcing her to look up to meet his piercing gaze. "Every kingdom is a chessboard," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "And you, princess, have just become the most valuable piece on mine." The word sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold palace air. She was trapped, yes, but as she stared into the eyes of the Storm King, she made a silent vow. She would learn his rules, she would master his game, and then she would shatter his board. The chambers assigned to Alana were opulent, a stark contrast to the cold throne room. Silk drapes, a mahogany bed, and a balcony overlooking the sprawling city of Eldoria. It was a cage, but a gilded one. A silent maid, introduced as Ilara, helped her change into a simple but elegant gown. "The king requests your presence at dinner tonight, your highness," she murmured, avoiding eye contact. Alana's mind raced. Dinner? Was this a tactic to disarm her? She spent the afternoon exploring her limited domain, noting the guards stationed at both ends of the corridor. Her balcony offered no escape. It was a sheer drop to the courtyard below. As she stood there, the wind whipping through her hair, she saw him below, King Caius, walking through the gardens with his commander, deep in conversation. He moved with uneasy authority, a predator comfortable in his territory. That evening, she was led to a small, intimate dining hall. King Caius sat at the head of the table, already waiting. He had changed from his formal attire into a dark, tailored tunic that made his gray eyes seem even more intense. "I trust you find your accommodations suitable," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "They are a significant upgrade from a horse and bindings," she replied coolly, taking the seat opposite him. A servant poured wine. Caius studied her over the rim of his goblet. "You are not what I expected." "And what did you expect? A docile princess who would weep and beg for mercy?" "Frankly, yes." The food was served: roasted pheasant, herb-infused bread, exotic fruits. "Why am I here truly?" Alanna asked, cutting straight to the point. "You could have simply supported Malachi's claim to my throne. Why go through the trouble of kidnapping me?" Caius set his goblet down. "Because Malachi is a snake who would sell his own mother for power. He made a deal with the Shadow faction of the Northern Wastes." Alanna froze. The Shadow faction was a myth, a bedtime story used to scare disobedient children. They were said to practice dark magic and seek to plunge the continent into eternal night. "That's a children's tale, is it?" Caius's gaze was deadly serious. "Your father believed in the threat. He was gathering allies to oppose them. His death was no illness, princess. It was poison, administered by Malachi on the faction's orders." The world tilted. The food on her plate suddenly looked unappetizing. "You expect me to believe that? You, who stole me from my home in the dead of night?" "I did not steal you. I removed you from the path of an assassin's blade. Malachi couldn't risk you uncovering the truth. He was going to have you killed after the wedding, making it look like an accident." He leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "You are not my prisoner, Alanna. You are my protected witness, and the only person who can help me prevent a war." Sleep did not come easily that night. Caius's words echoed in her mind. Poison, Shadow faction, war. If he was telling the truth, then everything she knew was a lie. Her father, a wise and cautious man, had always been suspicious of Malachi's ambition. Had he truly been murdered? The next morning, she was granted limited freedom within the palace walls, escorted by a stoic guard named Kellen. She used this opportunity to study her surroundings and its people. The servants were respectful but distant. The court nobles watched her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She was an outsider, a political pawn. She found the royal library, a vast collection of scrolls and leather-bound books. Hoping to find information on the Shadow faction, she was instead discovered by Lord Theron, the king's elderly and sharp-tongued advisor. "Looking for something, my dear?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Or perhaps looking for answers?" "Perhaps I am," she admitted, seeing no point in deception. "The king is a man of few words and many secrets," Theron said, pulling a dusty tome from a shelf. "But his actions, however brutal they may seem, are always for the good of the realm. He carries burdens that would break lesser men." He handed her the book, A History of Eldoria's Royal Lineage. "Start here. To understand the present, you must first understand the past." That afternoon, during her walk in the gardens, she encountered Caius again. He was standing by a frozen fountain, looking more like a troubled man than an untouchable king. "Did you find what you were looking for in the library?" he asked without turning around. "Your advisor believes I should try to understand you." He finally faced her, and for a fleeting moment, she saw the weight of his crown in his eyes. "And what is your verdict so far?" "I haven't decided yet," she said honestly. "But I believe you about my father." The relief in his eyes was subtle but genuine. It was the first true, unguarded emotion she had seen from him. "Then we have a foundation to build on. Malachi is consolidating his power in Revellon. He plans to declare himself regent in your indefinite absence. We have little time." "What do you propose?" Alanna asked, her heart pounding. "An alliance," he stated simply. "You have the legitimate claim to the throne of Revellon and the loyalty of its people. I have the army. Together, we can expose Malachi and thwart the Shadow faction's plans." It was a dangerous proposal. Allying with the man who had kidnapped her was a gamble, but the image of her father's kind face, betrayed and poisoned, steeled her resolve. She looked into the stormy eyes of the king and made her choice. "Then we have an alliance," she said, extending her hand. Caius took it, his grip firm and warm. "Welcome to the war, princess." The announcement of their alliance was met with a spectrum of reactions within the court. Some nobles saw Olenna as a strategic asset, others as a dangerous variable. The Grand Duke Vorian, a man with cold eyes and a silver tongue, became the most vocal skeptic. "Your Majesty," Vorian declared during a council meeting, his gaze sweeping over Olenna with thinly veiled contempt. "To place our trust in a foreign princess, one brought here under unusual circumstances, is a risk that could cost us dearly. How can we be certain she is not a pawn of the Shadow faction herself, sent to mislead us?" Olenna, seated at Caius's right hand, felt every eye upon her. Before she could speak, Caius's voice cut through the tension, cold and sharp as a blade. "Your concern is noted, Vorian," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But the princess's legitimacy is the key to unifying Revellon against Malachi. I trust my judgment." His hand rested casually on the arm of his throne, close to where hers lay. It was a subtle gesture, but in the politics of the court every movement was a statement. He was publicly aligning himself with her. Later, in the war room, the real work began. Maps of the continent were spread across a large oak table. Caius pointed to Revellon's capital. "Malachi has fortified the city. A direct assault would be bloody and would turn the people against us. We need to erode his support from within." "My uncle," Olenna said, studying the map. "Lord Edric. He commands the city guard. He was loyal to my father. If we can get a message to him, he could open the city gates." "It's too dangerous," countered Commander Kellen. "All communication in and out of the city is monitored." "Then we don't send a message," Olenna replied, a plan forming in her mind. "We send a person, someone they would never suspect." Caius watched her, a glimmer of admiration in his stormy eyes. "Who did you have in mind?" "A traveling minstrel," she said. "The court bard here, Lyra. She is gifted, unassuming, and owes you her loyalty. She can carry a coded message and a new ballad about a fallen king and a rightful heir." A slow smile spread across Caius's face, the first genuine one she had seen from him. It transformed his features, making him look younger, less burdened. "It's bold. It might just work." In that moment, surrounded by maps and strategies, Olenna felt a shift. She was no longer just a piece on his chessboard. She was a player. The following days were a whirlwind of planning. Lyra was dispatched with the coded ballad. Tension hung thick in the air as they awaited news. One evening, seeking respite from the stifling pressure of the war room, Olenna found herself in the palace's winter gardens. Glass ceilings housed a vibrant ecosystem that defied the cold outside, a hidden paradise. She wasn't alone for long. Caius found her there, standing before a rare midnight blue orchid. "It was my mother's favorite." His voice came softly from behind her. She said its color reminded her of the sky just before dawn, a promise that darkness always ends. Olenna turned. He was out of his royal regalia, dressed in a simple black tunic. He looked more approachable, more human. "You rarely speak of your family," she ventured. A shadow crossed his face. "There is not much to tell that does not end in tragedy. My father was assassinated by the Shadow faction when I was 16. My mother died of a broken heart soon after. The crown was thrust upon me when I was still a boy who preferred the sword to politics." The raw honesty of his admission stunned her. This was the burden Theron had spoken of. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Why did you believe me?" he asked, changing the subject, his intense gaze fixed on her. "About your father. You had every reason to think I was lying." Olenna looked down at the orchid, its petals delicate yet resilient. "When you spoke of it, there was no triumph in your eyes. Only a familiar pain, the pain of loss. That I could not doubt." He stepped closer, the space between them charged with unspoken understanding. "You see the man, not just a king," he murmured. "Not many do." From the pocket of his tunic, he produced a small, intricately carved wooden hawk. "I carved this when I was young. It's silly, but it reminded me to be watchful, but also to remember the freedom of the skies." He held it out to her. "A token of our alliance, and my trust." Olenna took the carving, her fingers brushing against his. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through her. The air was no longer cold, but thick with the scent of earth and flowers and something new, something fragile and electric growing between them. In the distance, a commotion broke the moment. Commander Kellen rushed into the garden, his face grim. Your Majesty, Princess. A rider from the border. Malachi has made his move. He's marching on the Eldorian outpost at Silver Pass. The war was no longer a future threat. It had begun. The palace erupted into a controlled frenzy. Within hours, Caius was clad in black armor, the golden eagle of Eldoria etched across the breastplate. He was no longer the contemplative man in the garden, but the Storm King, a force of nature ready to unleash his fury. To Alana's shock, a set of scaled, lighter armor was brought to her chambers. The king's orders, Kellen stated, his voice respectful but firm. He said, a player does not watch the game from the balcony. A surge of fierce gratitude warmed her. He was not sidelining her. He was bringing her to the heart of the conflict. The march to Silver Pass was a brutal affair. Alana, accustomed to palace life, found the pace grueling, but she refused to show weakness. She rode beside Caius at the head of the column, the carved hawk tucked safely inside her armor. They spoke little, the gravity of the situation a heavy cloak around them. At night, by the campfire, he would point out strategic positions on the map, his explanations concise and clear. He was teaching her, including her. On the third night, as a cold wind whipped through the camp, a young scout, barely more than a boy, stumbled into the firelight, his face pale with terror. Your Majesty, the outpost. It's gone, he stammered. They didn't just take it. They raised a black standard. A serpent coiled around a shattered crown. Caius's face went dangerously still. The Shadow Faction's sigil. They're not just supporting Malachi from the shadows anymore. They've shown their hand. The air grew colder. This was no longer a simple border skirmish. It was a declaration of war from a legendary enemy. They reached the Silver Pass at dawn. The sight was chilling. The Eldorian outpost was a smoldering ruin, and on the high ground above the narrow pass, Malachi's forces were dug in, their numbers swelled by soldiers clad in dark, nondescript armor, the faction's troops. Flanking them were hulking, wolf-like creatures with glowing red eyes, shadow hounds, beasts of legend. We're outnumbered, Commander Kellen muttered, his hand tightening on his sword. But we hold the pass, Caius countered, his voice calm. They have to come through us. His plan was simple but perilous. The main force would hold the line at the mouth of the pass. A smaller elite group, led by Caius himself, would scale the treacherous cliffs to flank the enemy and take out their siege weapons. I'm coming with you, Alana said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Caius looked at her, the storm in his eyes raging. It's too dangerous. You said I was a player, she shot back. And I know these cliffs. My father brought me hunting here. I know a path. The silence between them was charged. Trust warred with protectiveness in his gaze. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. Stay behind me. The climb was a harrowing test of will. The rock was slick with frost, and every sound seemed magnified. Halfway up, a loose stone gave way under Alana's foot. She slipped, a gasp escaping her lips. In an instant, Caius's arm was around her waist, hauling her back against the rock face, his body shielding hers. His heart hammered against her back, his breath warm on her neck. I've got you, he breathed, his voice raw with an emotion that went beyond mere alliance. They reached the top. The enemy camp was spread out below. As they prepared to attack, Alana saw him, Malachi, standing beside a tall, gaunt figure in dark robes, the air around him shimmering with dark energy. The faction lord. Caius followed her gaze. His expression hardened into something deadly. He met her eyes, a silent question and a shared resolve passing between them. Then, he raised his sword. For Eldoria, he roared, and the flanking party surged forward. The battle was a chaos of steel and shadow. Alana fought with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, her blade a silver dart beside Caius's black storm. They moved in tandem, protecting each other's backs, a seamless dance of death. She saw him, not as a king, but as a warrior, brilliant and terrifying. He saw her, not as a princess, but as an equal, brave and unyielding. As Caius engaged the faction lord in a duel of clashing steel and dark magic, Alana found herself face to face with Malachi. Foolish girl, he sneered, lunging at her. You side with a monster. The only monster I see is you, she snarled, parrying his blow. Their fight was brutal, personal. Malachi was stronger, but Olenna was faster, fueled by a righteous fury for her father. She saw an opening and took it, her blade finding its mark. As Malachi fell, his eyes wide with shock, the faction lord, seeing his pawn defeated, unleashed a wave of dark energy that threw everyone back. Caius was on his feet in an instant, standing over Olenna protectively as the faction lord and his remaining forces retreated into a swirling portal of shadows. Silence fell over the pass, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of dying fires. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Caius turned to Olenna, his armor stained with soot and blood, his chest heaving. He didn't speak. He simply reached out, his gauntleted hand gently wiping a smear of blood from her cheek. The gesture was more intimate than any kiss, a testament to the bond forged in battle. In his eyes, she saw the storm, but also a dawning, undeniable light. Victory at Silver Pass was bitter. The air hung heavy with the smell of smoke and blood. Olenna stood amidst the wreckage, her body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. She watched as Caius moved through the carnage, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. He knelt beside a wounded soldier, his voice low and reassuring as healers worked. This was not the detached king she had first met. This was a leader who shared the burdens of his people. Later, in the command tent, the mood was grim. Commander Kellen delivered the casualty report. We pushed them back, but the cost was high, and the faction's magic. We have no defense against it. Caius's jaw tightened. We will find one. His eyes met Olenna's across the map table. Your knowledge of the past was crucial today. You saved countless lives. The praise, delivered in front of his commanders, was a public acknowledgement of her value. It warmed a part of her that had grown cold since her abduction. That evening, he found her by the camp's perimeter, staring into the distant mountains where the faction had retreated. He handed her a cup of warm spiced wine. You fought bravely today, he said, his voice quiet. So did you, she replied, taking the cup. Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away. The faction lord. He looked at me. It felt like recognition. Caius's expression darkened. I felt it too. This is far from over. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Olenna, when you slipped on the cliff, I have never known such fear. The raw admission hung between them, more vulnerable than any declaration of love. The carved hawk in her pocket felt suddenly heavy, a symbol of a connection deepening into something real and terrifying. Their return to the Eldorian capital was triumphant, but the celebration was muted by the looming threat. Olenna was no longer seen as a captive or a mere political ally. She was the princess of Revellon who had fought beside their king. Days turned into a tense routine of strategy and preparation. One night, unable to sleep, Olenna wandered to the library. To her surprise, she found Caius there, surrounded by ancient, crumbling texts. I cannot sleep while our enemy wields a power I do not understand, he said without looking up. He pushed a tome toward her. It was written in a language she didn't recognize, but the illustrations were clear. Shadowy figures manipulating dark energies, and a counterspell involving a pure, focused light. The texts call it Heartlight, Caius explained, his voice weary. It's not a magic of spells, but of will, of conviction. It is said to be the only force that can permanently banish their corruption. And where do we find this Heartlight? Olenna asked, her heart sinking. It sounded like another myth. Caius finally looked at her, his stormy eyes filled with a profound, heartbreaking certainty. The texts are unclear, but they speak of a catalyst, a soul untainted by darkness, whose strength of heart can ignite the light in others. He held her gaze. When the faction lord looked at you, Olenna, it wasn't recognition, it was fear. The realization struck her like a physical blow. She was not just a political pawn in this war. She was the key to winning it. The weight of it was suffocating. She stumbled back, her mind reeling. All this time, she whispered, her voice trembling, was that the real reason you brought me here? Not to protect me, but to use me? Pain flashed across Caius's face. He crossed the room into swift strides, gripping her shoulders, his touch desperate. No, listen to me. I did not know. I brought you here to save you from Malachi. This changes nothing about why you are here. But it changes everything about why I must stay, she said, pulling away. Her world once again turned upside down. She was no longer just fighting for her throne or for revenge. She was fighting for the fate of the entire continent, and the burden felt heavier than any chain. The revelation of the Heartlight sat heavily upon Alana's soul. The corridors of the palace, once a gilded cage, now felt like the antechamber to an execution. Every glance from the courtiers seemed to hold a new weight: expectation, hope, fear. She was no longer just a princess or an ally. She was a prophesied weapon, and the pressure was a constant, suffocating presence. She began to avoid Caius. The raw honesty they had shared felt tainted, overshadowed by this new cosmic significance. How could she trust that his growing care for her was genuine, and not just a king's regard for a crucial asset? She threw herself into training, pushing her body to its limits with Kellen, hoping to find an answer in physical exertion that her mind could not provide. One afternoon, as she practiced sword forms in the courtyard, Lord Theron approached, leaning on his cane. "You run from him," the old advisor stated, not unkindly. "I run from what I represent," Alana corrected, her blade slicing through the air. "Ah, the burden of purpose," Theron mused. "Do you think the king is unfamiliar with it? He was crowned a boy and told he alone must hold back the darkness. You think he does not look in the mirror some days and see only a symbol, not a man?" Alana lowered her sword, her breath misting in the cold air. Theron's words struck a chord. She remembered the weight in Caius's eyes when he spoke of his parents, the vulnerability he had shown her. Was she now doing to him what others had always done, seeing the role, not the person? "He should have told me," she insisted, though the anger had faded into a weary confusion. "And say what?" Theron countered gently. "Princess, you might be the savior of the world, but I'm not sure. Some truths must be discovered, not declared. He gave you the texts. He trusted you with the knowledge. That, in itself, is a confession of his faith in you." A fragile truce settled between them. The need for unity outweighed personal turmoil. They spent their days in the war room, planning their next move. Intelligence confirmed the faction was amassing its main force in the northern wastes. They would have to march out and meet them. The night before their departure, a formal banquet was held to bolster the court's morale. Alana wore a gown of deep blue, the color of the Eldorian night sky. When she entered the hall, Caius was waiting for her. He offered his arm, his expression unreadable. "You look regal," he said, his voice low. "You look like a king expecting a war," she replied, but she took his arm. They played their parts perfectly, the resolute king and the radiant, steadfast princess. They danced, a calculated performance of unity for the court. But as the music swelled, his hand on her waist felt less like a pretense and more like an anchor. "I am sorry," he murmured, his lips close to her ear, the words meant for her alone. "Not for bringing you here, or for needing your help, but for the burden this knowledge places on you. I would bear it for you if I could." The last of her resistance crumbled. She looked up at him, seeing the storm in his eyes, but also the profound weariness, the loneliness, and the genuine regret. "I know," she whispered back. Later, on her balcony, he found her again. He didn't speak, simply stood beside her, sharing the silence. He placed a wooden hawk on the balustrade between them. "I carved this to remind me of freedom," he said. "I give it to you now as a promise. When this is over, regardless of prophecy or throne, you will have yours. I will ensure it." It was not a declaration of love, but it was something perhaps more profound. A vow to see her as Alana, first and always. The moment was shattered by the arrival of a breathless scout. "Your Majesties, the faction, they're not in the wastes. They've split their forces. One heads here, for the capital. The other, our scouts lost them in the Deadwood Forest heading west." Caius's face went pale. "Toward Revellon," he breathed. "They're not just coming for us. They're going to decimate your kingdom, Alana, to break your spirit before we even fight." Terror, cold and sharp, pierced her heart. The game had changed again. It was no longer about a battle on a distant field. It was a race against time to save her home. Panic was a cold fist around Alana's heart. Images of her people, her home, being consumed by the faction's darkness flashed before her eyes. She turned to Caius, her composure shattering. "We have to go. Now." Caius was already in motion, his voice cutting through the rising chaos in the hall. "Kellen, mobilize the Sky Legion. Light cavalry only. We ride within the hour." He grabbed Alana's arm, his grip firm. "We will save your kingdom." The race to Revellon was a brutal, desperate gallop across the countryside. The Sky Legion, Eldoria's elite riders, pushed their horses to the limit. Alana, riding beside Caius, felt every league stretch into an eternity. The Deadwood Forest was a direct but treacherous path to Revellon, and the faction, unburdened by conventional supply lines, had a terrifying head start. On the second day, they found the first signs of the faction's passage, a small farming village, eerily silent. No bodies, no blood, but every living thing was gone. The crops in the fields were withered to ash, and a faint, oily residue of dark magic hung in the air. It was a void, a place where life had been utterly erased. "They're not just conquering," Caius said, his voice grim. "They're consuming, draining the land itself to fuel their power." Alana felt a sickness rise in her throat. This was the fate that awaited all of Revellon. Her fear solidified into a cold, hard resolve. She would not let this happen. They reached the Revellon border at dawn, but they were too late to prevent the siege of Whitecliff, the kingdom's second largest city. From a ridge overlooking the valley, they watched in horror. The faction's army, a seething mass of darkness, surrounded the city walls. Shadowhounds clawed at the gates, while faction sorcerers launched bolts of corrupting energy at the battlements. The city's defenders, led by Alana's uncle, Lord Edric, were putting up a fierce but hopeless fight. "We're outnumbered 5-1, Kellen assessed, his face ashen. "Numbers are not the only advantage," Caius stated, his eyes scanning the battlefield with a commander's cold calculus. "Their general is there." He pointed to the faction lord, directing the assault from a raised platform. "He is the source of their coordination. He believes himself safe, protected by his entire army." A dangerous, almost feral smile touched Caius's lips. "We will disabuse him of that notion." He laid out a plan so audacious it bordered on madness. The main force of the Sky Legion would create a diversion, charging the army's eastern flank. Meanwhile, Caius, Alana, and a small hand-picked squad would use the chaos to slip through the western foothills, a narrow, undefended path Alana knew from her childhood, and launch a direct assault on the faction lord. "It's a suicide mission," Kellen protested. "It's the only mission that matters," Caius replied, his gaze locking with Alana's. "Are you with me?" The memory of the village, the sight of her people fighting for their lives, the weight of the Heartlight, it all coalesced into a single, clear purpose. She was done being a prize, a pawn, or a symbol. It was time to be a queen. "I am," she said, her voice steady as stone. "For Revellon." The charge was a thunderous spectacle. As the Sky Legion slammed into the faction's flank, Alana and Caius led their small team through the rocky path. They moved like ghosts, the sounds of the distant battle masking their approach. Reaching the edge of the platform, they saw him, the faction lord, his back to them, arms raised as he channeled his power. Caius met Alana's eyes one last time, a world of unspoken words passing between them. Then, with a shared nod, they erupted from their hiding place. The faction lord turned, his gaunt face contorted in surprise and rage. "The little princess and her pet king. You are too late." "We're just in time," Alana snarled, her sword flashing. What followed was a whirlwind of violence. Caius engaged the lord head-on, his black sword meeting dark energy in bursts of sparks and shadow. Alana and the squad fought off his elite guards. She fought with a mother's fury for her homeland, every strike fueled by a lifetime of love for her people. As Caius drove the faction lord back, the sorcerer unleashed a concentrated blast of pure shadow, meant to obliterate the king. Time seemed to slow. Without a second thought, driven by an instinct deeper than prophecy or strategy, Alana threw herself in front of Caius. The dark energy struck her full in the chest, a searing, cold pain worse than any blade shot through her. She cried out, falling to her knees, but instead of consuming her, The darkness recoiled. From the point of impact, a brilliant, warm, golden light erupted from her, the Heartlight. It was not a spell she cast, but a part of her very being. A light that had been there all along, waiting for this moment to ignite. The light washed over the platform, pure and cleansing. The faction lord screamed as his dark magic unraveled before it, his form beginning to dissipate. The shadow hounds below howled and turned to ash. The faction soldiers, their connection to the dark power severed, faltered in confusion. The faction lord, now barely more than a wisp of smoke, stared at Alanna with pure, undiluted hatred. "This is not over, child of light. My master awaits." His voice faded as he vanished completely. On the platform, the light faded. Alanna slumped forward, exhausted, the world swimming before her eyes. The last thing she felt was Caius's strong arms catching her. His voice, raw with panic and something more, calling her name as darkness claimed her. Alanna awoke to the scent of healing herbs and the soft crackle of a fireplace. She was in a chamber in Whitecliff Castle, the familiar banners of her home hanging on the stone walls. The searing cold was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant warmth in her chest, as if she had swallowed a tiny sun. Caius was asleep in a chair beside her bed, his head bowed, one hand still clutching hers. In the quiet light of dawn, he looked younger, the lines of worry smoothed from his face. Seeing him there, vulnerable and steadfast, unraveled the last of her doubts. His care was not a strategy, it was a choice. As if sensing her gaze, he stirred. His stormy eyes flew open, filled with a frantic worry that softened into overwhelming relief when he saw her awake. "You're alive," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. His thumb stroked the back of her hand. "You stopped his heart, and I thought I had lost you." "The Heartlight," she whispered, the memory flooding back. "It was me. It wasn't a spell. It was just me." He nodded, his expression one of awe. "It has always been you, Alanna. Your strength, your compassion, your will to protect. That is the light no darkness can extinguish." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. "But do not ever do that again, throwing yourself in front of me." "I would do it 1,000 times," she said, her voice firm. She saw the same truth reflected in his eyes. The unspoken words finally hung in the air between them, clear and undeniable. The door opened, and Lord Edric entered, his face etched with grief and gratitude. He fell to one knee before her bed. "My queen, you have saved our kingdom." The title struck her. With Malachi's betrayal and defeat, the crown of Revellon was hers by right. She was home, she was queen, and she was in love with the king of Eldoria. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Alanna was formally crowned Queen of Revellon in a somber ceremony within the still-scarred Whitecliff. Her first act was to formally solidify her alliance with Eldoria, an alliance now forged in blood and light. But peace was fragile. The faction was wounded, not destroyed. Their master remained a shadowy, unknown threat. Caius knew he had to return to his own kingdom to fortify their defenses and root out any lingering faction influence. On the eve of his departure, he found Alanna in the castle gardens, the place where she had played as a child. "I must go," he said, the words heavy with reluctance. "I know," she replied. "A king's duty does not end." He stepped closer, the space between them charged with all that was still unsaid. "This is not an end, Alanna. It is a beginning." He took her hands, his gaze intense. "I love you, not because you are a queen or the child of light. I love your spirit, your courage, your stubbornness. I love you." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "And I love you, Caius, not as the Storm King, but as the man who carries the weight of the world yet still found room in his heart for me." From his pocket, he drew not the wooden hawk, but a simple silver band, etched with the intertwined symbols of a hawk in flight and a storm cloud. "This is not a crown. It is a promise that I will return, a promise that our kingdoms will stand together, a promise that my heart is yours, for as long as you will have it." As he slid the ring onto her finger, the final piece of her world, once shattered by his abduction, clicked into a new and more beautiful whole. She was not a kidnapped princess. She was a queen, an ally, and a woman loved by a king. He kissed her then, under the stars of her homeland, a seal on their vow. It was a kiss of love, of promise, and of a future they would build together. Come what may. The war was not over, but for the first time, Alanna faced the coming darkness not with fear, but with a light in her heart and a king by her side. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe. More stories await, only on Drama Tales.